Thank you so much for the intro, and thanks everyone for coming. I get super excited anytime I get to talk about numbers. But I think the thing I like to talk about even more is using data and especially evidence to help make companies better, right? So I've been in tech for a long time. I started out as a mainframe programmer. What's up? And then I was a software and hardware engineer, and then I went and got my PhD so that I could help organizations and teams get better, because when I started my career, it was like walking through and kind of tearing everyone through that Y2K panic, and then the ensuing crash when like some companies didn't, I mean, it wasn't the panic we thought it would be, but then also companies still couldn't keep up with the change that was necessary. And I don't want to see companies fail to keep up, right? And we're starting to see that again now. And so Dora is myself and Jez Humble and Jean Kim, and together we realized that we've been on this journey of like really wanting to help organizations understand how to do things better and how to make things better for, you know, a decade or more, each of us. And that's really what drives Dora, right? It's DevOps research and assessment, because this rigorous process of understanding what makes things better really kind of underlies everything. And it's interesting because it does come down to the stats many times, but it often starts with conversations and ethnographies and shadowing people and really understanding what's happening at organizations, right? Jean has been traveling around for years understanding what's happening at organizations. I was doing it myself. My PhD started with ethnographies. Jez has been working with companies for years as well. So we use so many different methods to really help us understand what data we should collect. And so thanks to everyone for coming to organizations, for having coming to conferences, having conversations with everyone, and then taking the survey for anyone who has. Has anyone here taken the survey before? Who here is thinking about taking the survey this year? Thanks, love you forever. We'll talk about what we're investigating this year at the end. This talk is basically about what some of my favorite things are that I found over the years. So we just wrote a book, it's called Accelerate, and it ties together the last 4 years of research. We have over 23,000 data points around the world. Organizations big, small, highly regulated, crazy startups, right? And we found a whole bunch of really great stuff. And someone pulled me aside one day and they said, so what are your favorites? And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of a lot. What are some surprises? And so these are kind of some of my highlights. This is what we'll cover today. Technology matters. Maturity models don't work. Transformations need tech and process and culture. I'll talk a little bit about architecture and technology. How you can accelerate your journey, that leadership matters, how we can make work better, and then how everyone here can help. Okay, so let's go. First, technology matters, which I'm sure everyone here is like, yeah, Nicole, thanks. Newsflash. This is actually something that's relatively new, though. So Nicholas Carr wrote a paper in Harvard Business Review that was titled IT Doesn't Matter. So this sucks, because every executive reads Harvard Business Review, or at least they read the title of the paper in Harvard Business Review, and then they're done, and they're like, sweet, I'm out. This is now a cost center, and I no longer have to pay attention. And we're like, oh, FML, right? The challenge is that Nicholas Carr sort of had a point, and I'll get back to that point in just a minute. But what they had found, what Nicholas Carr had found, and what decades of research had found, sorry, that's Nicole's drinking game. Research says, take a shot. What decades of research have found is that investments in technology weren't showing up in the bottom line because we were doing it wrong. But what we've actually found in our research, and some other recent researchers have also found, so Eric Brynjolfsson out of MIT, James Beston out of Boston University, is that now it does matter. So here's what we know. DevOps is good for technology. Okay, what do I mean by technology? Software development and delivery. So DevOps, right? Development and delivery with both speed and stability. So this isn't just like going crazy and letting the wheels fall off. And this is how we measure it, which I'll point out because, as I'm sure many of you know, if we don't have a clear definition, someone can just debate you forever. So we're talking about speed and stability. Speed is deployment frequency or when the business demands, lead time for changes, code commit to code deploy. I focus on that part of the pipeline because that is the part that is predictable. It can be made more efficient. It's not that fuzzy front end, although that's still important. That's kind of the R&D part. That's the creative part. Okay, that's different. I also look at MTTR and change fail rate. That's the stability part. This is interesting, right? Because we can think about how this is some dev and some ops, right? In theory, these should be intention. They are intention. It's a global measure. It's an outcome measure. We see that high performers excel at all of this. They move in tandem. They go together. Low performers kind of suck at all of this. Okay, I just said high performers and low performers. Nicole, what do you mean by that? For the last 4 years, I've taken these measures. I've thrown them in the pot. And I've said, dear data, what do you mean by this? There's a grouping of all 4 of these doing really, really well. Statistically, right? Statistically, they're doing well. And then there's a gap. And there's a grouping hanging out in the middle, statistically. And then there's a gap. And there's a grouping down here where everybody sucks. I'm really creative, and so I call them high performers and medium performers and low performers. So that's what we see. And they're always hanging out together. So software delivery performance is throughput and stability, right? They're all hanging out together. You can't have it all, right? And they're possible without trade-offs. High performers are doing both. Low performers are sucking at both. Okay, we also see DevOps is good for organizations. So what Nicholas Carr was saying, based on the data in the 80s and 90s, because it was different back then, is no longer true. High-performing technology organizations are twice as likely to achieve or exceed profitability, productivity, and market share goals. Now, we realize that more matters in organizations than just money. Not-for-profits, not-for-profit organizations don't care about money, but even for-profit organizations care about more than just money. The interesting thing is that we found that this 2x multiplier also holds for broader goals, like quantity of products and services, right? So effectiveness, efficiency, customer satisfaction. Now, for bonus points, in 1 year, I had enough data from publicly traded companies that I could take a look at what the stock market was doing. I saw 50% higher market cap growth over the previous 3 years, high performers compared to low performers. So this is also showing up in the market, in the external markets. Okay, now maturity models don't work. Maturity models are for chumps. Who here has played World of Warcraft? Yeah, okay, who here's heard of World of Warcraft? It's fine. Or has a friend that plays it? It's fine. When World of Warcraft first came out, this was the world, right? We had 2 lands. It went up to level 60, I think. So if we had created a maturity model for World of Warcraft, level 4, let's roll with it, right? Level 40 is good, level 50 is great, level 60 is amazing. And let's say that you also have to make it to to get to good, you have to have 1 land conquered, and for great, you have to have 1 land plus half the other conquered, right? That sounds good. That's my maturity model. Now, in our organizations, we hand this maturity model, which, by the way, we just made up. Welcome to the world of maturity models. They're all made up. This is real. We handed it over to our executive team, and they now march forward. They dedicate resources. By resources, I mean time, attention, money, effort. We all get to level 60, although really it's always level 5, right? We get to level 5 on our maturity model, right? So we have achieved level 60. We have conquered both lands. The executives turn their attention to something else. We move on with our lives. We fast forward a few years, and the world has changed. The landscape has changed. You can now get to level 110. The technology has changed. In the game, like, you can get new tools and technologies. You can get pets. You can go to extra lands. This is very much like the world. The technology landscape has changed. The competitive landscape has changed. Our customers expect different things of us. But the executives are like, what you talk about, Nicole? I hit level 5. I met my maturity model and I am done. This doesn't work for us. It doesn't work in very complex environments like technology transformation. It just doesn't. It also assumes a lockstep process. But we know, I'm sure, especially in large organizations, different teams are doing different things. And they progress differently, as well they should. We see this in the data from the State of DevOps Report. And this is only over 4 years. Imagine what happens over 10. The best keep getting better. So when I compare the high performers to the low performers, high-performing teams are more agile. I see 46 times more frequent code deployments. It's the difference between multiple times a day and a week or less. I see 440 times faster lead time from commit to deploy. It's the difference between less than an hour and more than a week. They're also more stable. I see 96 times faster mean time to recover. High performers recover in less than an hour instead of several days. Several days, y'all. They're also 1/5 as likely that any change will result in a failure. Now, I say failure, but that's any type of incident that requires any type of response. Now, some people are like, that's just pushing out code. Yes, but pushing out code lets us delight our customers. It lets us pivot when we need to pivot. It helps me beat a competitor to market. On the off chance, I've met with 1 or 2 customers that are like, I have no competitors. I will deliver to the federal government. Okay, well, you have compliance and regulatory changes. How often does the government turn on a dime? How often do security vulnerabilities come out that we have to respond to? This is kind of an eye chart, but see where you might fall. Your teams might fall. High performers, the thing to really pick out of this, high performers are maximizing on all dimensions. Low performers, not so much. Although low performers, everyone really is getting better year over year, right? This is very different from when we did this in 2014, which is also why I start over every year, right? I didn't create the maturity model of DevOps in 2014 either. Okay, next up. Transformations need tech and process and culture. Now, when I say tech, I broadly mean continuous delivery because it's so all-encompassing. When I talk about management principles, I'm talking about drawing from the lean and agile canon. When I talk about culture, I often talk about culture and leadership. Now, our research has shown that these drive organizational performance and tech performance. Back to Nicholas Carr, when he said IT doesn't matter. He really had a point. He was doing his research based on data that came out of the 80s and the 90s. Back then, organizations were buying tech, plugging it in, and walking away. I can't blame them for that. That would be dope, right? If I get a performance bonus because I bought something and I implemented it and I could check it off my list and I could be done, that's amazing and that's easy. That also sounds a lot like DevOps in a box. People selling that right now will not see the returns that their competitors are seeing. If you want to see the returns, you need tech, you need process, and you need culture. We know this. And we're seeing this, right? It needs to be tech plus. You can't just buy a server and throw it in a closet because you know what? Your competitor can do the exact same thing. Even if it's something hard like SAP systems, right? Your competitor can buy the exact same thing and implement it over the next 10 years and $10 million customizations, right? If someone else can replicate it, it doesn't give you a competitive advantage over the maybe 3 months of lead time that you beat them to. It gives you a point of parity, keeping up, but not a point of distinction, getting ahead. The things that help us win are the things that we can build inside our companies that no one else can build. That's tech and process and people, right? It's tech plus. So DevOps is CAMS, right? The original definition was Damon Edwards and John Willis here. I like CALMS, right? I like having that L in there because we have learned that we draw so heavily from that lean movement. The State of DevOps reports over the last 4 years have shown this. We also cite this in Accelerate. And most recently, James Besson out of Boston University, they summarized it in an HBR article titled, "The Real Reason Superstar Firms Are Pulling Ahead." And it's because of IT combined with other things like management or brand or IP, which is interesting to point out because he's finding that, I'm going to quote this here, strategic use of technology explains revenue and productivity gains more than M&A and entrepreneurship. Tech was so hard for companies to figure out for the longest time, so they were just creating or acquiring revenue by buying up other firms, right? Which some of us may have noticed, where companies are just like buying other firms to acquire revenue. Tech plus is getting bigger gains than even that now. It's the DevOps, y'all. Okay, architecture matters and technology doesn't. This is really interesting, and I love this, and it's my favorite rebuttal when people are like, oh, but I'm on a mainframe. Oh, but I have old technology. Oh, but, I'm like, y'all. Low performers are more likely to be working on software developed by an outsourcing partner. So like they just outsource it and they never look at it again. They are more likely to be working on a mainframe system. It's just likelihoods. However, working on a mainframe system is not statistically correlated with performance, those high, medium, or low performing groups. And working on a greenfield or brownfield or any other system isn't correlated with performance either. Okay, subtitle, no excuses, right? Okay, so what does matter? What does matter is if your team can test and deploy without having to do a lot of coordination among teams. Can you use APIs? Do you have service-oriented architectures? If you have to coordinate with a whole lot of other people, even at the people level, the technology level, that is what slows you down. We have seen this work on mainframes. We've seen this work in hardware. Granted, it's going to be a little trickier, but it can be done. So can your team make large-scale changes? Can your team complete its work? Can you deploy and release on demand? Can you do most of your testing on demand without having to do a lot of coordination externally? That is the key, regardless of brownfield, greenfield, legacy systems. Technology matters, okay? Sounds a lot like Conways Law, right? Also, I think this is a check somewhere in DevOps Talk Bingo. You either have to cite Deming or Conway. There you go. Organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. If your org looks like you have to do lots and lots of handoffs and emails and calendars and all this craziness, you'll probably inevitably end up building that into your tech. And by the way, what happens when you sell that tech to somebody else? You may end up imprinting that communication style onto another org. A really great example I have of this comes out of NASA. So 2 different robots. We have Mars Curiosity, and we have Cassini. Cassini went around, Saturn or Jupiter, far away. It was built a long time ago. Cassini was built at a time when teams were highly, highly matrixed. Each team had their very, very own set of instruments. If you wanted to take a picture or a measurement from the planet, you had to physically turn it. So the teams had to figure out who got dibs that day, okay? Contrast to Curiosity, the Mars rover. The Mars rover mission, they built as many in as they could. It was very cross-functional. At the end of the meeting, they went around the circle at the table, and every single scientist, engineer had to say, I am happy, and mean it. Cassini, when the scientists start fighting, the robot starts breaking without touching the instruments. And that robot is gone. Mars rover, was supposed to live weeks, and it lived years. Imagine what happens to tech that's a few feet away from us. Okay, you can accelerate your journey on transformation. Our research has found key capabilities that really drive software delivery performance. They fall into 4 categories: tech and automation, process, measurement and monitoring, and culture. So I'm going to race through these. Tech and automation, we have version control, deployment automation, continuous integration, trunk-based development, test automation, test data management, shifting left on security, continuous delivery, having a loosely coupled architecture, which I just talked about, and architecting for empowered teams. In process, gathering and implementing customer feedback, right? Making sure we know what it is we're building and why, and that it's the right thing. Working in small batches, having a lightweight change approval process, and allowing for teams to experiment. We did some work with CapitalOne, and they found that by focusing on just the right things, for them it was trunk-based development and streamlining the change approval process, they saw a 20x increase in their releases in only 2 months with 0 increase in incident. Measurement and monitoring is also great, right? Visual management, monitoring for business decisions, not just to wake you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and hit snooze and roll over. Checking system health proactively, instituting WIP limits, and having visualizations. Another great example out of CapitalOne is their Hygiena system. It's been open sourced. Really giving people a way to see what it is they're doing. I mean, I used to tear through log files with the best of us, but sometimes a nice visual helps. Culture. Culture is important, right? So often we talk about how culture is important. What do we mean by culture? I'll talk about Westrum in just a second. Also having a climate for learning, right? Do you work somewhere that really values learning and improving? Because I don't know if you've noticed, but tech moves fast. Do we work somewhere that understands that and encourages us to keep up? Collaborating among teams, making work meaningful, and transformational leadership. Now, when I talk about Westrum, I end up bringing this up a lot. Dr. Ron Westrum was a sociologist who studied culture in high-risk, high-complex environments like hospitals, nuclear power, and air traffic control. And he found that a culture that optimized for trust and information flow resulted in good outcomes, performance outcomes. And so we tested this in tech to see if it would hold, and it does. So this is what it looks like. A pathological culture, we see this show up in about 1/3 of our data responses. Typified by low cooperation, messengers are shot, responsibilities are shirked, bridging is discouraged, right? Like we don't want to reach across teams, we stay very siloed. Failure leads to scapegoating and blaming, novelty is crushed. Who here has a friend that might work in that environment? Couple friends? Now, the bureaucratic organization, they showed up in about 55% of our responses. Modest cooperation. Messengers are neglected. If you bring me bad news, like, I don't want to hear it. Narrowly defined responsibilities. I kind of deal with a little bit of bridging. Failure leads to justice. Novelty leads to problems. Who here has a friend that works here, maybe? Okay. Now, bureaucracy was created for a good purpose, right? Like judging and evaluating everyone equally. But it can be tricky. Now, generative and performance-oriented cultures, we see these in high-performing organizations. This shows up in the rest of our data. High cooperation. Messengers are trained. I want to find bad news. Please help me find failures so I can fix them. Risks are shared. Bridging is encouraged, right? Like, please do more cross-functional work and collaboration. Failure leads to inquiry. This sounds a lot like postmortems, right? Which is why when we ran through this, I was like, this is going to be dope. This totally sounds like DevOps. Novelty is implemented. Who here has a friend or is lucky enough to work on these type of teams? Who here has no friends? Great. Okay, now, everyone asks, where should I start? The answer, honestly, is it depends, right? I alluded to this in maturity models, right? No one has the exact same path. You just don't. You need to figure out what is holding you back. What is your constraint? Okay, that said, like I'll let you know what the patterns are that I see most often. In the 2017 data worldwide, architecture was the strongest contributor to continuous delivery. showed up, and it shows up for many teams in the work I do with Dora. So we do assessments for companies, and we can identify what their constraints are. So architecture shows up in the need for loosely coupled architecture or trunk-based development. Having a lightweight change approval process ends up being a constraint for most teams in our company assessments as well, which I'm sure y'all have seen. And if you haven't, then you're amazing, and your company is dope because you have no bureaucracy and no change approval processes. So if y'all are hiring, that's the place to go. Also, continuous integration ends up being a really good place to start. Okay, so what to do? Identify your constraints, pick a few. I worked with one company that had 50 initiatives. Y'all, it's gonna be hard. Pick a few, knock those off the list, reevaluate, see what your next constraint is. Rinse and repeat. Okay, next up, leadership matters. DevOps was historically a grassroots effort. But now that companies realize this helps them make money, suddenly they care a lot. So they want to try to help. So how can they help? Okay, leadership does matter. This is the type of leadership that is impactful and helpful. It's called transformational leadership. It drives more and better outcomes than servant leadership. Okay, so these are the 5 dimensions that are helpful. Intellectual stimulation. Help your team challenge the status quo. Challenge the team to ask better questions and ask good questions. Be inspirational. Inspire the team, say positive things about the team, right? Be a good cheerleader. Be supportive. Consider personal feelings. Be thoughtful of others. But still also remember personal recognition. Recognize individuals on the team when they do outstanding work, right? Because you want to know that what you do matters. And then vision. Have a good vision for the team, understand the vision for the company and for the organization, and be able to communicate that so everyone knows where it is that we're going. However, we did find that leadership is necessary but not sufficient. Teams with the least transformational leaders were only half as likely to be high performers. But leaders can't do it alone. The very, very, very best, the teams that reported the very, very, very best leaders were no more likely to do better than anyone else. Why? Because leaders aren't the ones doing the work. They only help us do the work. They support, they amplify, they encourage. They can help, but they don't do it themselves. This was the research model for 2017. I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing, but I do want to point out a couple things here. So the arrows mean drives and predicts. Look at where transformational leadership is. That doesn't mean it's most important. It's just all the way to the left. It means it underlies. It supports, it amplifies everything else, right? It helps support all of our technical work. It helps support all of our lean management work. And when we do it right, it flows all the way through to software development delivery, that IT performance, and it flows all the way through to our organizational outcomes. Good leadership makes a big difference. So, really quickly, we can make work better. Our research has also shown that making investments in technology make everything better. It leads to a decrease in deployment pain, a decrease in burnout, and higher employee net promoter score. We recommend our place as a great place to work. A good example of this, Microsoft found that by investing in continuous delivery, work-life balance scores in 1 year went from 38% to 75%. That's huge. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead just a tiny bit because, I got too excited. I talked too much. Okay, you can help. What can we do? This is our role. We can also be transformational leaders. Notice it says leader and not manager. We can all help out. Measure a couple things. Sorry, I like numbers. Focus on outcomes. Think about something that would be an outcome, and then think about something that you can help improve. And if it doesn't work, then iterate next time. But having measures to help show what the impact is really helpful, and also helps communicate. Share your stories. Share them with us, share them internally, share them externally. Evangelize it internally. Start small, and then grow from there. I loved Jennifer talking about coffee ops, right? Support efforts across and external to the organization. There can be meetups, there can be hack days, there can be informal brown bags at your own company. Just grab lunch with a couple people if you want. Utilize whatever resources you have. Luckily, DevOps is an amazing, amazing group and organization because we do a bunch of helping. Share your stories again. Okay, if you want more goodness, email NicoleFV@sendyourslides.com. You'll get a free 93-page excerpt of my new book. You'll get this presentation. You'll get our ROI white paper on DevOps. You'll get a metrics guidance white paper. You'll get a tactics for leading change white paper. You'll get an ACMQ article on DevOps metrics. So that's NicoleFV@sendyourslides.com. And if I could ask for one more thing, because I love you, because you showed up here super early this morning, help us make history. So the State of DevOps survey is out. We have over 23,000 data points. Actually, we've got over 27,000. This year, we're extending into cloud and platform, database, monitoring observability, continuous testing, security, leaders, and culture. We're partnering with Google, and I would really love to have your feedback. And if you go to our website, it'll be there. So thank you so much for your time today.